So I'm going to back up just a little bit, right? We're talking about interest groups before the break. Remember, interest groups are organizations of like-minded people that have come together to, try to use the group's size and resources and influence to get policy they want from government, or to keep policy they already have in place, or to overthrow policy that's in place, right? But it's an organization that you're trying to impact policy, some form or fashion. The four general ways that we see interest groups involved in politics and trying to impact things are lobbying, electioneering, litigation, and going public. And we talked about last time the concept of lobbying, which is, right, getting in communication, getting in contact with decision makers in government to try to get what you want. And we stepped through there's a requirement in Texas that lobbyists register, and then 2, they're going to be engaged in these other 5 things once they've registered and have been recognized as a lobbyist. This is the focus of their work, and it's from most effort to least effort, right? There's most of the time their job is an information job when they're lobbying, right? Get information in front of the people that can make a difference, as well as doing some of these other things. And we worked our way through this slide. So today we're going to pick up on the next element of what a lobbyist is engaged in, and that's, or what an interest group is engaged in, and that's electioneering. And there was a little bit of this in the first element as well, but this is kind of its own area of participation for an interest group. And that's to start trying, once they have relationships with candidates, or especially already elected representatives in state government, they've been, as an organization, engaging the legislature, trying to get policy in place or support policy, and they've, by doing that, have identified and worked with people in the state legislature, and have said, okay, these folks are working from the same political perspective we are, have the same values that we have as an interest group, and so they're valuable to us, right? They're in office and they're continually supporting the same things we support. So we've got a vested interest in keeping these folks in office if they're already elected. And on the inverse side of things, if there are people in office that they're continually in opposition to this interest group, and they see a new candidate rising up to challenge this person that's in office, and that candidate is making, right, inroads to supporting the same thing the interest group does, then they're going to look at maybe, right, throwing some support to that candidate, right, and trying to help them. So electioneering is where the interest group starts engaging the election process and engaging candidates that are, incumbents and challengers in this process. It's one step removed from why they exist, right? I mean, they exist to get the policy they want. And now that they've embroiled in politics and government and what's going on, and they know the lay of the land and who's working with them and who's working against them, they're going to start putting resources, time, and effort into maybe helping some folks, right, that will help them. Obviously, these interest groups are made up of voters, right? You're probably, if you're a member of an interest group, you're probably very much a regular voter. If you're, right, voting takes a certain level of commitment. Putting your money and your time and effort into an organization like an interest group takes even more. So if you're a member of an interest group that's working the halls of Texas legislature, you're probably a regular Texas voter too. And so you're paying attention to candidates, and you're paying attention to elected individuals. And so now, right, it's just natural for an interest group to start thinking, how do we keep the ones we want in office that are working with us, and how do we help elect other folks that would work with us? And you've got resources as an interest group. You've got money. You've got people. You've got a network, right? And so you can use all of those things to leverage support and try to keep, right, people that are going to help you in office and get more in office. You're not like a political party in the sense that you're running your own folks out of your membership group to take office, although that's not, right, impossible or anything like that. It's just generally not the focus of the interest group. But certainly if a member of your interest group was also, right, a candidate for office, you would probably be supporting them, right? Because they're already in line with all of your goals. So you're going to use money, right, that your interest group probably charges a membership fee, right? You may, as an interest group, take a portion of that fee and shuttle it over into supporting candidates that are explicitly on the same ideological perspective that you are, right? For your interest group is what they want. So if you're an education interest group, you're going to be looking for those candidates that are strong education supporters, and your interest group is going to probably donate money to their campaigns, right, to keep them elected. They're certainly going to support the folks that support them. So they're going to use their money. They're going to use the strength of their membership rolls, right? If the candidate that's running for office or running for reelection asks them and says, hey, I see you've got 10,000 members here in the state of Texas. Do you think you can convince some of them to volunteer some of their time to make phone calls on behalf of me as a candidate or on behalf of the party that I'm a member of, right? As a party, we generally support the same ideas that your interest group does. So could you marshal up some folks, right, to help knock on doors, make phone calls? And interest groups will be happy to do that, right? They'll be happy to tell their membership, hey, get involved, right? These are the folks that are supporting the same issues you are. So let's get out there and support them. And then bigger interest groups especially will be looking at developing what are called political action committees. Political action committees are an offshoot of an interest group. They are a subset of an interest group, and their focus is specifically campaigning and electioneering, right? So what they're going to do is be a targeted response to trying to get people in office or out of office or whatever the case may be. And they're going to go about, most of the time what we're going to see them or hear them reported doing is donating money to campaigns and candidates. But that's not all they do. Political action committees will also be involved in putting out information, ads, flyers, whatever, that's trying to educate voters about the issues that the interest group thinks is important, and how those voters, if they agree with those ideas, should vote for candidate X or party Y or whatever the case may be. Now the interesting thing is that what's driving the interest group is to get people in office that are going to support their ideas. They don't really care what party these people belong to. They don't really care necessarily what these people that are going to be reelected or elected to office think on a lot of other issues, right? They're an interest group. They're focused on their policy area. So they're going to try to make sure that whoever gets in office first supports their policy. Two, if they don't necessarily support their policy, then they're going to hope to educate them to a point so that they're not against their policy position. But what's the primary job of an interest group when they're lobbying? What do they do? What are they supposed to be doing? Their most important job. You may remember. What is it that the democracy needs from these interest groups? We talked about this last time under lobbying. The biggest thing this group is doing is what? Any interest group, what are they doing? This will be one of those awkward pauses. Collecting money. Does that help them get anything? What's the money for? Is the interest group exist to collect money? Implementing policy. And they're not going to vote themselves. So their job is to get information into the political system, right? Their job, interest group's job, their lobbyist job is to get information that supports their position in front of decision makers to open doors. So the money is important because it lets them develop the information and get in front of there. So right, the money's important, but that policy is what's driving them. And the information role they play is how they get most of their traction. Political action committees and their electioneering element here are doing something really important too. They're going to support financially maybe all of the candidates. Right? There's something a little weird going on here, right? But think about it, right? You've got a candidate that's a challenger running for office. You don't probably think they're going to win. Most challengers don't. Maybe the incumbent that's running for re-election, it's not really on your side all the time, but you've got an open door, or they have an open door policy with your group. So you know you can talk to them, right? You can get in there and give them information. You're probably going to be donating some money to their campaign if they ask for it, even if they're not staunch supporters, because you want to keep that door open so that you can get your discussion, your debate, your information in front of them. With a challenger, right, maybe they're going to win. And if they do, you want to have supported them too, right? You want to have given them some money. You want to have given them some membership support, right? Some financial aid. So political action committee, right? Part of what it's going to do is probably get out there and support both the incumbent and the challenger, so that whoever gets elected, they have an open door to. Doesn't mean they'll have the support from them, but they'll probably have the opportunity to get in and talk to them again. So it's really interesting. If you look at campaign donations made by political action committees to candidates for office, you'll quite often see the same political action committee giving money to both the Democrat and the Republican, and maybe even the Libertarian that's running for office. Now, you'll notice there'll generally be a different amount of money, right? The incumbent's going to get more money than the challenger probably, unless the incumbent is an ideological enemy, right? Meaning that they never will vote for this interest group's policy. Then they may not donate to them because it's not going to do them any good. And they'll give a lot more money to the challenger, or give only money to the challenger. But it's interesting to look at the electioneering process, because you can get a real sense of what the conversation looks like in politics from the interest group's perspective. So electioneering, they're going to do all of these things, right, to aid candidates for election. Sometimes the incumbent, sometimes the challenger, sometimes both, right? Because at the end of the day, the biggest thing that they want out of this is access to that decision maker once they're in government, whoever it is, right? So you don't alienate the opposition in that sense, right? So electioneering is an interesting part of this. And you'll see, right, during election periods, during campaign periods, you'll see ads quite often. And these ads will be ads that are maybe supporting one candidate over another, maybe an issue information ad, which at the end turns into support for one candidate because they're on that side of the issue. But from the interest group's perspective, they're trying to educate the public. Here's an important issue. Here's where the candidates stand on this issue. if you think X about this, then you've got to vote for so-and-so, or you got to vote against so-and-so, right? And a lot of your more questionable but interesting political ads, right, especially the negative ones that are trying to take somebody down, will be from political action committees, because they've identified a candidate that is never, ever going to be helping their policy perspectives. And so at that point, they're like, let's burn the bridges and let's, let's work as hard as we can to make sure this person doesn't get elected and or reelected, whatever the case may be. And that's where you'll see some of the harshest political ads coming, because in that sense, the opposition candidate to that person is not saying the bad things. This interest group is. You can bet that somewhere there's been some cross-pollination between, right, the person and the interest group that are on the same side, and this negative ad popping up attacking the other candidate, right? Generally speaking, that's not supposed to be the case, right? The political action committees are supposed to act on their own without any coordination from a candidate campaign. That's one of those kind of gray areas that we see. We have to question whether that's really true or not. But the idea is that an interest group is going to be doing this work from their own perspective, from their own policy positions, as an educational outlet for voters. And in that sense, should not be a organized and directed arm of the actual political campaign. They should be operating outside of that. If an interest group does work hand in hand with a political candidate, all of that work, all of that money, all of that time has to be translated into essentially monetary value of a donation given to a candidate. And there are limitations on how much money individuals or interest groups can give, right, as political campaign money. So, an interest group can't have $10 million and just give $10 million to a candidate. There are limitations of, I think, is it $5,000 now for political action committees, of how much direct support they can give to a candidate. All of the rest of the time, effort, and money they spend has to be non-directed by the candidate. In other words, it has to be the interest group saying, this is what we, the interest group, think is important and or want. And the candidate may get support from that because they happen to have the same idea. But if the candidate's campaign was talking to the interest group saying, hey, you ought to run an ad, the minute that happens, then all of that support is supposed to be reported as a political donation. This is where we see, problems quite often, in the campaign process and how money and support is there. And this is you hear people talking about dark money in politics. It's generally the money that's being spent by political action committees, right, of an interest group that they're spending on their own behalf. But boy, it looks like it really, really supports exactly what candidate X wants. And everybody's looking at that going, is there any coordination there? This money's coming from wherever. And as a political action committee, there are a lot different and less controls over how they spend their money, as long as they're not direct contributions. So there's a lot more that can kind of happen here. Does this make sense? All right.
Yeah, it does.
The third place that we see interest groups spending some time and a lot of money and it's just because of the nature of it, is in litigation. In other words, getting involved in the courts to try to have some political impact. This is not where interest groups want to be. Interest groups, right, only go into litigation when this is the last best chance for them to make an impact. It's much more advantageous. It's much more economical. There's much better implementation issues if they get involved and are successful on the front end of legislation. If you're, as an interest group, looking to get into the courts to make an impact, that's probably because you lost on your issue with legislation. And now there's legislation that's been passed that's going to be put into practice, and it's going to impact your group and your policy ideas and issues adversely. And so now you're going to the courts as a last ditch effort, basically, to try to stop this, right? And it's a lot harder to do that because your opportunities for impact are constricted once you get into the court system. You're going to generally be doing two major kinds of work as an interest group if you're going into the court system to try to affect policy. One, you're going to sue to stop implementation of that policy, right? Let's say you're an environmental group, or no, there's a Texas national issue right now where this is going on. Keystone Pipeline, right? Keystone Pipeline, right, is bringing crude oil from Canada, tar sand oils from Canada down through the pipeline. Some of it, is to be shipped across country to Los Angeles area as well as Houston area, and it gets put on, big tankers and goes off to mainly China is the country is using that kind of tar sand oil for energy purposes. We don't use most of it here in the United States because it's too dirty. But Canada is interested in having this pipeline because it's going to lower their cost of transmitting that oil to departure ports in the U.S. that can then get it to their market in China. The U.S. is interested in it business-wise because building pipelines makes money and creates a few jobs, and then maintaining and running those pipelines does the same thing. And then some of that oil will make it to refineries, and those refineries will make money, and then they'll sell the oil that's refined oil, whatever it's refined into, and plastics or gas or whatever. And so there'll be profits to be made there, and there'll be jobs to be made there. The other element of it that's really important in Texas is the Keystone Pipeline. Part of it's comes through Texas. It's already built in Texas because Texas oil pipelines, that's us, and so there's an arm of the Keystone Pipeline that goes out to West Texas that allows West Texas crude, right, to come in and join into the Keystone Pipeline and go down to Houston, which makes transportation very cheap for that product. And that's already in place and it's already operating, so it's kind of already done here. Most of the consternation and political concerns are in the North Midwest, right? Especially where it's crossing indigenous people's grounds, right? And they want some say over, right, their land and what's going there and how that's impacting them. So at this point, right, we had the pipeline, right, with permits and going forward under the Trump administration, and then the Biden administration comes in and says, no, we're not going to let that pipeline keep going forward. We're going to stop it. And as president and the CEO of the bureaucracy, he can implement new changes, right, to this kind of stuff and have an impact there. Keystone Pipeline folks, right, are suing, right, to keep that permit in place that allows them to keep building. They're trying to stop presidential action and keep the status quo going. They don't want to be in court, right? The interest group that's representing the builders and the oil people and the energy folks, right? They don't want to be in court spending lots and lots of money trying to stop right? This new interpretation by the executive branch. But if they don't, this project is done as far as they're concerned, and a lot of the oil that would be coming out of Canada wouldn't make it where it needs to go. And so, right, they've already got sunk money into building parts of the pipeline. They've been working this policy angle for years. They thought they'd won. They did win as far as the legislation was concerned, and now this roadblock from the president administration is being put there, and they're being forced into court to say what the president's doing is not right. Courts, you need to tell the president that he can't do that, and he has to leave this alone. It's already been decided by Congress. It's already been signed off by President. You can't change things now. And of course, the president's like, I do have the authority to do this, and I am going to do this, and we'll meet you in court. And of course, for the government, going to court is just part of the process. But for the interest groups that represents all of these other factors, this is going to be a high escalation in cost and effort to now try to fight this, right? Because now they got to stop something that they thought they were going to have. And so they're going to have to go into the courts and say, right, here's the reason the president doesn't have this power. The president is overstepping his political bounds, right? This is the constitutional reason he can't do this. And they're going to have to try to convince the courts that they're right and the president's wrong. Possible, but probably a slow, expensive process. And the odds of them winning are pretty slim, usually, right, in these instances. So they don't want to be here. But as an interest group of related people, groups, and businesses that want to see this pipeline happen, they're suing, right, to stop this implementation of the new policy by Biden's administration. Of course, on the other side, you're going to have interest groups that are going to be there as well, right, and they're going to be saying, no, what Biden's doing is exactly within his authority and his ability of the constitutions, and they can't stop this. In courts, you shouldn't listen to them. Now, those groups, and I'm going to jump down a level here. We're going to skip interpretation for a moment. Those groups are going to be there not as parties to the lawsuit, because the lawsuit is the affected interest groups suing the president, right, in the president's role of implementation. But they're going to be filling out what are called amicus curiae briefs, which are friend of the court briefs. And these are briefs that provide information to the court from both pro and con sides of the issue, saying, president, right, in this case, right, especially the indigenous peoples, right, First Americans groups are going to be sitting there going, this is exactly the president's right position and ability to do this. This is exactly a proper constitutional exercise by the president. And here's what the president's protecting, and there's how it's going to help us, and here's why the court should see, obviously, the president's doing the right thing. Now, they're not part of the lawsuit, right? The lawsuit was the interest groups that are adversely affected against the president. President's going to be supported by the Solicitor General, who is, right, an attorney that works for the U.S. government. So those are the two affected parties to the lawsuit. But the other side of the issue, right, gets to come in through the amicus curiae briefs and provide information into the process as well. So, and for them, this is exactly the same process as what they're using, providing information as lobbyists, right? Only now they're doing it to the judges in the court system as opposed to decision makers in Congress. And then it works exactly the same way here in Texas, right? And then this is a federal issue with a little bit of a Texas flavor to it because we're part and parcel of the Keystone. But the interest groups are the same. The interest groups are going to be working this issue at the federal level. And I guarantee you that there's, right, Texas petroleum energy groups that are watching all of this that are probably supporting the Canada side of it a little bit, especially if they've got some ability to make profit off of building or working the product once it gets down to Texas ports and refineries. But they're also going to be there just trying to make sure that whatever happens doesn't stop the Texas side of it, right? That they're still going to be able to use this end of the pipeline to get West Texas crude in there and things like that. So it's an opportunity for all of these groups to get involved in the process again, from the perspective of, is this going to go forward, right? The legislation's been passed. We're now to the part where the government's implementing that legislation, and that gives an interest group that's on the wrong side of it an opportunity to stop it there. Again, it's not very cost effective. The odds are that they're probably swimming upstream on the decision making here, and they're going to lose. But if they don't fight it, they lose anyway. So it's time to spend money. It's time to get their lawyers in front of the court. And then the other periphery interest groups will be filing the friend of the court briefs, the amicus curiae briefs. And the court, of course, is sitting there taking all this information in and deciding whether they're going to hear the case at all. And if they do, who gets to come and talk, and they'll start thinking about the big issues there, and whether there's any room any space that requires them to make a decision that's not already got some decision out there, right? Something new or different that requires them to make a call. If it's all settled law and what the president's doing has been ruled on cleanly before, they won't even hear the case. They won't even bring it up, and the interest group will have filed the lawsuit, and it won't be brought up, and they'll just have lost the time, effort, and money that went into getting that lawsuit filed. Obviously, if it goes forward, then they're going to go to court and make their arguments and hope they win. The other place that you'll see interest groups going to court is the second bullet, which is suing for interpretation. And this is, they don't have an argument basically to make that the executive branch can't implement this law, right? They're always going to be focused at the executive branch things of this because they've already probably lost in the legislative side of things. So what they're going to do now is the executive branch is going to say, okay, this law passed. We have to now do what the law says. We're going to the executive branch going to issue a set of rules that say, here's how we're translating this law into action, into implementation. And those rules provide the context of what's going to happen right when the rubber hits the road. And so an interest group is going to be, even if they've won, it's going to be watching that very closely to make sure that when implementation starts, those rules are written that talks about how it's going to start. It's actually delivering what the law said, right? Because there's certainly the opportunity for the law to say X, and the executive branch, the bureaucracy, to look at that and go, oh, well, that means X1, X prime or something a little different. And the interest group is going, whoa, 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 that's not what they meant at all. That's not what the law means. And if Congress doesn't send a clarification over to the executive branch, these interest groups are going to go to court and say, look, the executive branch is doing the job they're supposed to do. They're just doing it the wrong way. And the law means this, not that. And courts, you got to tell them, right? You're the ones that interpret the language of the law. Tell them it means this, and tell the executive branch to do it this way, not that way. So we're suing for interpretation, which may be very, very important for that interest group that it's done a particular way at a particular time or something. And so they're going to be suing to get the federal courts involved to direct the executive branch to do things the way they believe the legislation is written. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of opportunity for interpretation when you look at legislation. You can go grab almost any piece of Texas state legislation and read through it, and when you're done, you're going to go, what? Huh? Does that mean this or that? And then you go look at the agency that's going to be tasked with putting it into practice, and you look at the rules they've come up with. Well, okay, here's what the legislation says, and here's how we're going to operationalize that. And you go, wait a minute, really? Like that? Why not like this? And every time you have one of those places where you can ask a question like that, you have an opportunity for a lawsuit on interpretation. Now in Texas, we try to do a good job at the bureaucratic level of engaging political and public discourse before we write rules. Okay, so we do give, right, as legislation comes down and the agency is going to be responsible for implementing that legislation, and we start writing those rules, we do engage all of the interested parties and tell them, here's what we think it means, here's what we're writing, and we publish that in draft mode, and we have public meetings about it before it gets voted into actual administrative law. And so that's an opportunity for those interest groups to get involved, not through a lawsuit, but through just public engagement with the agency to try to make sure we're all on the same page. When there's no agreement, there's when you're going to see the lawsuit happen, because the agency is going to say, no, we've talked with the governor, we've talked with the senators and House members that wrote this bill. They said and told us do it this way, and that's the way we're doing it. And the interest group is like, no, we talked to them, and that's not what they mean, right? And so there's always room for that to happen, right? And so suing for interpretation is an opportunity to take it into the court system to get a definitive answer from the judicial side of things about what the legal terms mean and how who has what authority to do what, and is this being done the right way? Make sense? Again, interest groups don't want to be here, right? They want to spend their money up front, get the law written the way they want it, step back and watch it go into practice and be done and say, great, we got what we wanted. No, the sue in this sense means file a lawsuit, right? The court is not going to take up an issue unless there's actually a suit filed. But do they even get money? Who? The courts? The people filing the suit? No, the people filing the suit spend money, right? Because it costs money to go into court to get a lawsuit put into place, and then it costs money for attorneys and printing and time. And so every time an interest group sues, right, they're spending more money and time and effort, and they don't want to if they don't have to. To sue means to instigate a lawsuit, right? And the place that you sue is the term for file a lawsuit. And so you can do that to stop implementation, or you can do that to get a new interpretation on the words that are in law, right? These words mean this. So you hear the word sue and you think money. You should, right? Because anytime you start a lawsuit, it costs money. Yes. Anytime anybody goes to court, they're spending money. Whether it's to, in a civil situation, everybody's spending money, right? And in a situation where you're suing the government, you're going to be spending money. And that's why they don't want to do this. They don't want to go into litigation because they don't want to spend money, and they'd rather work on the other side of issues than they would having to try to defend something or overturn something. So they don't want to be here. But they're not left any choices, right? Either they lose or they spend money and then have a chance of getting the result that they want out of the court system. The courts are there as an opportunity to provide justice and interpretation about what's going on, but justice and interpretation are not free. And so rich people and rich organizations, right, will use the system more often than other folks because they can afford to, but it costs everybody money. Okay, so we've talked about suing for implementation or to stop it. We've talked about suing for interpretation to get a different read on the law that's already there. I've explained to you how other groups can get involved to get their information into the court's hands through amicus curiae briefs. The last bit of this is a little odd, but it's interest groups can and quite often play an integral part in instigating class action lawsuits. And this takes a little bit of explanation to understand it. Have you ever gotten a piece of mail? Usually it's going to be something, I see it most often with cars. You'll get a piece of mail or something, it'll say, a class action lawsuit has been started on behalf of this group of people against this car manufacturer. And usually it's for something that's unsafe about a car, or it's about a warranty issue that the car manufacturer is not living up to a part that seems to be bad or something. And somebody starts what's called a class action lawsuit, and you get a notice in the mail that this lawsuit has started. And they tell you you're a party to this lawsuit. And to stay a part of this lawsuit, you have to do nothing, right? Okay, so let's talk about what that is and how that happens. Interest groups, right, have a focus on some topic or issue, some policy that's got them out there organized. And let's say we're going to stick with our car issue here. There are organizations out there like maybe the AARP, right, Advanced Association of Retired People, who's looking out for their membership, or AAA, which is, right, association, automobile association that you can join, that provides services to travelers and car owners and all that. But they also are an interest group, and they're looking out for the best interest of their membership. And let's say you've got a car, and for some reason, the airbags, people believe the airbags are defective. They're either going off when they shouldn't or not going off when they should. And it seems to be, right, a whole, say all, I'm going to just, I don't know, Abilene car manufacturer, right? We'll use a fake name, right? This car company, the Abilene car company, has been making these cars, and they've got a problem with their airbags. Normally, right, as the purchaser of an Abilene car, you'd have to, as an individual, sue them if you went to them and said, "Hey, my airbag went off and I didn't hit anything, and I think it's defective, and you need to fix this." And they go, "You're crazy, and we're not fixing it. Go away." And so you would have to go to civil court and sue the car company and say, "Hey, I want this fixed." And that's you, David, against car company Goliath. But let's say you belong to American Association of Automobile Owners or something, and you file a complaint with your interest group saying, "Hey, I've had this problem with my car, and I'm not getting any resolution. Can you help me?" And as an interest group that represents car owners, they may reach out to the car company and say, "Hey, why don't you fix this? You should fix this. You have an obligation to. You should fix this." But the other thing that's going on is that this is a nationwide organization, and they see, hey, this Abilene car company in Abilene, Texas is making these cars. We got a whole bunch of people in Texas that bought them that are a member of our organization, and they're making all the same complaint, right? And then here's a few here in New Mexico and a few here in Colorado and Oklahoma and Arkansas, bought these cars out of this new car company called Abilene Car Company, right? And it looks like the airbags in these cars are defective. Turns out that Abilene Car Company builds their own airbags. And so maybe they didn't do something right. They're a new company. Maybe they messed something up, but they're not coming through and supporting their product. The interest group, right, the American Automobile Association, has this information from their membership all over this area that's pointing out this big problem that's affecting a larger group of people. This large group of people may not know each other and may not know that they're all sharing the same problem. but they form a class, right? If you were to look at it, this is a class of people having the same problem with this one company, and they're all members of our association. We should support them. We should help our members get their money back or get a repair or something from this car company. And we're big enough with enough members and enough money that we can now sue maybe this car company, and they'll pay attention, right? And they won't be able to just bury us because we're competitive as far as the money and voice and all of that. So the AAA may sue on behalf of all of these people that are having the same problem. And it's called a class action lawsuit when they do that. And they're saying, look, instead of having a lawsuit in California and Arizona and New Mexico and Colorado, and right, let's just all bring it together in one court at one time, us against them, and settle it. Get this taken care of. And they'll go to the court. The organization will go to the court and says, we want to form a class action lawsuit. Here's the information. Here's why we think it ought to be tried in one place all at one time. The Abilene Car Company may agree even to do this because, all right, instead of doing 300 lawsuits all over the country, they can just do one lawsuit here and be done with it. And so you form this class action lawsuit. The group that forms it notifies all of the people that you're a member of it. Court has agreed. And if you don't want to be a member of it, you need to send us a letter opting out. If you don't do that, we're going to go to court on your behalf. We're going to sue. And if we win, whatever we get out of that, we will split up after we take our percentage, of course. We will split up between all of the folks here that were members of the class action. And that might be a monetary result. It might be that you get a new airbag, right? Who knows, right? But an interest group will sometimes be involved in class action lawsuits because they're an organization that just happens to be in the place to see the problem, and the problem affects their members. And so this is a service for their membership, right? Now, this doesn't, it could be a lawsuit against the government, but it doesn't have to be, right? This could be a lawsuit, like I said, against a car company or something like that. So this is the last and kind of odd little place that you'll see interest groups get involved in litigation. Make sense? All right, so these are the 4 types of litigation places that interest groups get involved in, and that covers that. If we move on, we're going to talk about the last thing on this today for the interest groups that they get involved in, and that's what's called going public, is the term we give to it. If you go back, right, to looking at the reasons for an interest group and how they come together, an interest group, right, is trying to get policy out of government. For the most part, that's where their focus is getting policy out of government. And so most of the time their intention and their effort and their attention is focused on government. And trying to get the results they want out of it. Sometimes, though, they're not being as effective as they would like to be. Maybe they're not being effective at all. They've been chasing this primary goal of getting the policy they want. And what they figure out, what they find out in the end, is that they're not well organized enough. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough membership. Or they just simply don't have enough support. In another way of phrasing it. So at that point, when an interest group figures that out, they need to at least turn some of their attention away from chasing their primary goal of getting policy and work on building secondary support, right? Public support, which is a secondary goal. They need to, right, start changing hearts and minds, right, of building their membership, getting their message out. If they can't get people to join their organization, at least maybe get them right, to believe the same thing that they believe, that they'll take to the polls with them as voters. So they change their focus from just getting the policy they want to, right, building support either ideologically or through membership or right through donations or something that will then be able to be used to go back and chase policy again. The simplistic way I like to look at it is when you're losing chasing your primary goal, it's time to start chasing your secondary goal, right? And if you can go back out and get more people to believe what you believe, that will reinvigorate you, reinvest you, restart you on getting the policy you want. So this is all about trying to change public opinion, to be supportive of your policy and your interest group, and trying to get people to join and to donate and to support your organization. So this is you go public, right? You turn around and you focus on the public, right? To get better traction, to get more political clout, to get more money and more membership. So maybe when you started off, you're like, look, we need to be a small but dedicated group of individuals working hard to get this done. And so you limited your membership, right, to a manageable number, and you were jumping into this and you're all committed and gung-ho and people are donating money and you're doing your work and you're losing. You're not getting what you want. And what you realize is that there's just not enough support publicly to get Congress folks in the Texas legislature to listen to you. So you need to turn around and go back out to the public and build up your group and make it a bigger group, make it have more influence, right? Try to maybe support some campaigns through a political action committee. But whatever you're trying to do here is focused on making your organization have a bigger impact, have more clout, have more ability to get things done. So right, this is a little different focus than normally what your interest group wants to be working on. Now, to be right, not open about all of this, right? Most interest groups continue to have some element of their organization focused on the public, focused on education and membership drive, and trying to ensure that as members maybe lose interest and quit, that new members are coming in. There's always, most organizations are spending some time and effort on maintaining their organization, if not building it. So the public part of this is usually always part of what an interest group organization does. It's part of the general maintenance, right, of that organization. Even if you're getting the policies that you want, even if you're being successful working with the Texas legislature, part of your resources and time are making sure your organization stays up to date, and that new people are coming in and that more money's coming in. If you're being successful, that's usually pretty easy because you're out there saying, look at the things we're doing and being successful at. If you want to keep supporting this or you want this to stay the case, join, right? And people are like, yeah, I like this and I'm going to join. When you're losing, it's a little harder because you're now out there trying to get people, right, to join, and they see that you're not being successful and they have to decide, joining means giving you money as an organization, right? Paying a membership fee or maybe a membership fee and volunteering. And so there's going to be a cost to people to join, and they've got to decide whether your organization is worth that to them. And so you have to sell it, right? You have to be delivering, right, enough things that will convince people when you're in this going public mode to actually part with their money and their time. And that can be difficult. That can be real difficult. So organizations, interest groups would prefer not to have to do this after the startup period and after they're up and running. They'd rather be successful on policy and have that speak for itself and generate support. But sometimes, especially if they're losing, They got to reorganize. They got to retool. They got to go out and focus on the public side of things again and build and support their organization before they can go back engaging government to chase their policy goals, their primary goals. Does that make sense? So doing this, right, doing this public part where you're focused on the group and the organization and how well it's working, or I'm going to lose my voice here. You get another drink. Doing all this requires some kind of organization and effort. And that means that people within the organization are looking at and trying to decide, how big do we need to be? Can we affect politics in Texas with an organization that has 1,000 members? Does it need to be 5,000 members? Does it need to be 1 million? Right? So size is one of those considerations, especially when you're first starting out, or if you're not being successful, and you're looking at your organization and trying to figure out how to make it better. Size is one of the things that you have to consider. Looking at all of the Texans in Texas, how many of them do you think are actually ripe to be engaged on joining the group, and how much of a group do you want to manage, right? Because if we're a very small focused group, right, the overhead of managing that group and getting that group motivated and going out is very low, right? You've got 30 people. 30 people is not that hard to organize and manage. What about 300 people or 3,000 people or 300,000 people, right? As an organization grows, the cost of managing that thing grows, and the cost of keeping it organized, keeping it together, keeping everybody on the same page, keeping them interested, right? These are all costs that balloon for an organization as they get bigger. So one of the big challenges for an interest group over time being successful is managing the benefits and trade-offs of a big organization versus the cost of maintaining that organization. If you're the AARP in Texas and you've got 1 million members, that benefits you a lot when you're down in front of the legislature saying, hey, I'm the lobbyist for AARP, and 1 out of every 30 people in Texas is a member of our organization, and so we would like you to listen to us and work with us, as opposed to our organization has 300 people or 1,000 people. So there's some benefits, obviously, to being large, but there are a lot of costs that go along with it. And so if you're trying to manage the size of your organization, you're either going to be managing it to be smaller, managing it to be about the same to maintain its size, or managing its growth. And so there are some tools that you have as an organization to bring to bear on this, right? If you're a successful organization, your history, right, your purpose, your goal is going to provide most of the momentum for growing the organization, if that's what you want to do. It also is, if you're successful, means you don't have to grow the organization that much. You've already got what you want. You just got to maintain it so that you can preserve this policy over time. So you may even want to start to look at streamlining your organization, but you got to do something, right? If you don't tend to the organization, what's going to happen? You've been successful. You've got the initial policy you want into place. People are satisfied. And then renewal time comes up and they're going to look at it and go, yeah, you want me to send you $100 again this year, but we've already got the policy we want in place. Maybe I've got a better use of that $100. You've got to be delivering something that convinces them, no, you need to keep ponying up that $100 every year so that we keep what we got and maybe get some more stuff that we want. But we need to maintain this organization so we can stay politically effective. three places you can do that. You can provide, right, organization and around your idea and your policy, but you've, right, the purpose, right, and you can use your organization to try to reignite the flame under that purpose and say, here's what we're about. We've got this far. That's a good thing. And you can have that message, right, and maybe that convinces people again and again to stay in the organization or to grow the organization. You might try doing some organization events, something that will lead to solidarity among the membership, that will develop a kind of perspective of, this is my group and I belong to this group and I like being with these people that think the same way about these issues. And so I'm invested in the group, not just the results of the group. That would be working on solidarity, right? So you could work on purpose, you can work on solidarity. And that's going to require the organization spending money on having, right, quarterly meetings or having some kind of get-togethers where you share time and fun, or a conference or something about it, where you get more information and education, and that stimulates people to stay in the organization, something like that, right? You've got to build some kind of social environment that encourages people to stay as members. And the third thing is, you can take the very crass approach and say, here's stuff, right? You joined, you became a member of this organization. Here's a bumper sticker that lets you tell everybody you're a member. Or here's a t-shirt or a hat or a bag, or, right, a magazine, a quarterly, right, something that you put into the hands of your membership that reminds them that they're getting value out of being a member of this group. So there are a lot of different ways, 3 different types of ways to try to manage the size of your groups. And interest groups have to do this if they're going to stay around, right? They have to think about these things. They have to put time and effort and money into managing the size of their groups. And anytime you join an organization, and especially an interest group, there's going to be some of this going on, right? What might convince you to initially join the group is the idea. And then you find out you like hanging around people that believe the same thing you do. And hey, I kind of dig the hat, so all of those go to a little bit of kind of supporting this. Does this make sense? All right, we'll pick back up with this next time, and we'll talk about one of the problems that organizations run into, interest groups run into. Any questions before we dismiss for the day? All right, guys, gals, do good. Start working your papers, right? I will have, Davin, I'll have the video up in probably less than an hour, right? However long it takes it to process before I'll put it up there, but it'll be there for you to look at it today. All right. All right, y'all have a good day, and I'll see y'all on Thursday.
Thank you,
Unless
Professor.
you come to
Have a good day, everybody.
office. No, paper right now, right? Paper test coming up on the 31st, but paper needs to get started.